Namaste. I'm Professor Ithamar Theodor, and this is a course on the book Exploring the Bhagavad Gita, Philosophy, Structure, and Meaning. Let me first blow the conch shell for auspiciousness. Now, let me show you the book which we are going to study. And this is the cover of the book. The book is called Exploring the Bhagavad Gita, Philosophy, Structure, and Meaning. And this book is about the Bhagavad Gita. It includes the entire Bhagavad Gita, verse by verse translation. It includes a commentary and an explanation of the entire book, including its structure. The book was published in 2010 by Ashgate, UK. And let us read what the endorsements of this book are saying. The first endorsement is by Professor Julius Lipner from the University of Cambridge. He's writing, "This is potentially one of the most significant books to emerge in recent times on how to read the Gita, for it provides a clear way forward to make coherent sense of one of the most important yet methodologically intractable texts of religious Hinduism. I found this book an illuminating experience." The next endorsement is by Professor Keith Ward from the University of Oxford. And he's writing, "A fascinating book which throws new light on the Gita and should help to make it more accessible to those who wish to read this great spiritual classic." Third endorsement is by Professor Klaus Klostermeier, who passed away about 2 years ago. Great scholar of Hinduism. He writes, "Ithamar Theodor approaches the ancient Bhagavad Gita with a modern mind and finds much in it that deserves our attention. Locating a study within comparative theology and identifying the various layers of meaning in the text will help those acquainted with it to find their way through this complex classic. Combining the philosophical, theoretical with the ethical, practical, the author shows the universal relevance of the Gita's teachings." Then he writes, "Since Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, nobody has offered as penetrating a study of this classic as Ithamar Theodor has done." So these are the scholars who have endorsed the book. Now, this book was published in 6 languages, and please let me show the various languages. This is the Hebrew version, Bhagavad Gita, and you see here a murti of Krishna from South India on the cover. That's a murti which is situated in a museum in northern Israel. Then the next edition was in Chinese. This is the Chinese edition, which was published around 2015 or so, I'm not exactly sure, 2014. And that is the Chinese edition under the name Seeing Tao from Here. The next edition was an edition in Russian. This is the Russian edition, and it is apparently in libraries and I think also popular audience in Russian-speaking languages. And then the next edition was made in Portuguese. Second, some problem with the sharing. I'll share this. This is the Portuguese version. This was done in Brazil by a press called Vozes, an academic press. And following that, there was a Hindi edition which was published in 2024. So this is the Hindi version, which is of course available in India. Besides these editions, there's also an Indian edition of the English text, and you can also see this one. This was published by Routledge in India. So there's also an Indian edition in English. See, this is a special Indian edition. So now I've spoken a few words about the book, the endorsements, and the various editions which this book has been published. The book is dedicated to my beloved daughters, Inbal Jahanavi, Nili, Nilamadava Devi, and Kama Kamalini. I have 3 girls, and I have dedicated the book to them. Okay, so now perhaps let us speak a little about the introduction of the book. What is the book about, and what is the unique features of this specific edition? In general, there are various possible ways of reading the Bhagavad Gītā. It can be read as a work of literature or poetry. It can be read as a work in the realm of Indology, or examined from the point of view of Oriental studies. And it can otherwise be read as a work of philosophy or theology. As a work of literature or poetry, its literary and poetical aspects will naturally be highlighted. As such, the verses, meters, the particular epithets of Arjuna and Krishna, and the corresponding emotions evoked by their application. These and similar aspects will possibly be looked into. As a work of Indology, its historical and linguistic aspects will be highlighted, and as such, questions regarding the date of its compilation, the singularity or plurality of authors, the linguistic structure of the text, and its relation to the context of the Mahabharata would be naturally considered. As a work of philosophy or theology, its conceptual structure, its underlying assumptions, and its prevailing ideas would be merely considered and examined. And this is the thrust of the present edition. Bhagavad Gita scholarship has become somewhat complicated and sophisticated, so much so that at times a gap has appeared, distancing the general readership from the scholarly analysis of this widely read text. The present work is perhaps driven by a pedagogical impulse, and as such has not only a different mood than the analytical approach, but different aims. As far as the mood, I invite the readers to relax, to enter into a somewhat contemplative mood as befitting the reading of a great classic treatise. As far as the aims, I hope to further the reading of the Bhagavad Gita as a work in the realm of philosophy or theology, and to help the reader gain a vision or darshana of this great treatise. For this reason, I am consciously avoiding comprehensive bibliography and dense footnotes, as these may distract the reader from the simple but deep ideas originally conveyed. The present work was born as a work of theology and was sharpened and further articulated in the milieu of the Theology Faculty, University of Oxford. One of its main aims is to offer a unifying structure open to a rational examination, a structure which will tie the text together. This structure is constructed applying the metaphor of a 3-story house, and it is mainly composed of 2 components. On the one hand, there are 3 different stories or floors, and on the other hand, a staircase leading the house's residents from the 1st floor towards the 2nd and the 3rd floors. The 3 floors represent 3 levels of reality, whereas the staircase represents a transformational ladder of ethical and spiritual refinement. In the wider sense, I would like this work to be considered a contribution not only to the study of the Bhagavad Gita, but to the emerging field of comparative theology. As once the structures of great theological works could be articulated, these could be compared, contrasted, and grouped together, thereby offering a unified sense of pluralistic spirituality which may serve as an alternative to materialism. Originally, Greek philosophy was also inseparable from Greek religion, and only gradually was it articulated in universal philosophy. Similarly, this work may further a slight step in this direction, in that it emphasizes the Bhagavad Gita's philosophical nature, relevant also to non-Hindu context. Examining many of the available academic editions, one realizes that they offer an introduction followed by verse translation. The present edition joins the few editions which render the text divided into sections and add a commentary. I hope this approach proves to be useful. Let me conclude by quoting the Bhagavad Gita itself. Raja Vidya Raja Guyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Pratyaksha Bhagamam Dharmyam Susukam Kartum Avyayam. This is a royal science, a royal mystery, the supreme purifier, experienced directly. It conforms to dharma, pleasant to act upon, and eternal. May the readers, which is you, enjoy this great treatise. And I signed the original edition of this book while I was a postdoctoral fellow at Clare Hall, the University of Cambridge, on January 3rd, 2008. Actually, I was a visiting fellow there, but this was my postdoctoral program. So now, having said a few introductory words, we may enter into a more general introduction. So let's speak a few words of introduction about the book which we are going to study. The Bhagavad Gita is a literary and theological treatise and a foremost world classic. It has occupied both an authoritative and popular position within Hinduism for the last 1,000 years or so. Due to its major influence, it is sometimes called the Hindu Bible or even the Indian Bible. Moreover, innumerable people worldwide are able to quote it, whether in their mother language or in the original Sanskrit, as an expression of their faith or worldview. The treatise itself appears as part of the Mahabharata, the great Indian epos, and comprises a dialogue conducted between two of its heroes, the general-in-chief Arjuna and his cousin, charioteer and friend Krishna. Although the dialogue is rather short and does not exceed 700 verses, it is engaged with the subject matters of the highest theological and philosophical order. As such, it concerns everyone who faces human existence, namely each and every human being. The epical circumstances are rather dramatic. Due to a long family strife, all the world's armies gather at the battlefield of Kurukshetra, some supporting one family branch, the Pandavas, or the other sons of Pandu, while the others supporting the Kauravas, or the sons of Dhritarashtra. Arjuna foresees the massacre about to take place and is reluctant to direct his weapons towards his family members, friends, and teachers. As such, he desires to relinquish the war altogether and avoid fighting in these terrible circumstances. Out of his deep distress, Arjuna turns to his friend Krishna and asks for directions which may rescue him from this severe crisis. Answering Arjuna, Krishna speaks the Bhagavad Gita, which may be possibly translated somewhat roughly as the Song of God, or perhaps more precisely as the Supreme Person's sacred poetical treatise. It is likely that the Bhagavad Gita was composed around the 4th or 2nd centuries BCE, and as such belongs roughly to the same period as that of the great Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle. From the religious point of view, the Bhagavad Gita is a Vaishnava text, as to consider Vishnu or Krishna to be the Supreme Lord. Whereas from the philosophical point of view, the Bhagavad Gita comprises one of the triple foundations of the Vedanta tradition, along with the Brahma Sutras and the Upanishads. From the cultural and social point of view, the Bhagavad Gita represents orthodox and mainstream Hinduism, in that it accepts the authority of the Veda and the social, religious order of the four social groups called Varnashrama, which is at the heart of dharma. So now, let us speak about dharma. Now that we have mentioned dharma, let us speak about dharma. So, dharma as comprising and defining human society. Very important. The term dharma is central to Indian thought and may be translated as religion, duty, morality, justice, law, and order. Dharma is not only external to the human being, rather it is perceived as comprising the essence or nature of everything. As such, it aspires to place everything, not only the human being, but the whole of the phenomena, in its proper place. Thus, for example, the dharma of the teacher is to teach, and the dharma of the sun is to shine. Dharma aspires to establish human society on a solid moral foundation, and as such, it defines the human being through two parameters, which are the personal and professional statuses. The personal status is defined through one's relation to family life, and it is comprised by dividing human life into four stages. As such, one spends his childhood and youth as a celibate student, a brahmachari, practicing austerity and discipline while living devoid of possessions under the direction of the guru. Along with the character building one undergoes, he studies the spiritual traditions and develops awareness of the highest truth named Brahman. Having concluded his training period, he enters the stage of married life called grihastha and fulfills the four aims of life. He follows dharma and contributes to the maintenance of the social order. He accumulates wealth, satisfies his desires, and eventually turns his attention towards moksha, the ideal of liberation from the cycle of birth and death. Once the children have grown up, he gradually returns to the more renounced mode of life practiced during youth and enters into Divana Prastha stage, along with his wife. Gradually, the couple becomes detached from family, social, economic, and political matters and turns their attention towards more spiritual matters. At the last stage of one's life, one becomes a sannyasi and renounces the world altogether, both internally and externally. In this stage, he meets death, and being enlightened and detached, he is able to get free from the vicious cycle of rebirth. The second parameter defining the human being is the professional one. As such, Dharma defines four occupational groups which cover the entire range of occupations, supporting a proper human society. The first group is that of the Brahmins. According to the ancient Vedic metaphor, comprise the head of the social body. This is the intellectual class comprised of teachers, priests, philosophers, and intellectuals, and they are characterized by qualities such as tranquility, self-restraint, austerity, purity, tolerance, honesty, knowledge, wisdom, and religious piety. They guide and advise human society, and they do this from a distant position without assuming political or governmental authority. The second group is that of the Kshatriyas, who, according to the Vedic metaphor, comprise the arms of the social body. This is the ruling class comprised of kings, nobles, generals, and administrators, and they are characterized by heroism, ardor, determination, expertise, fighting spirit, generosity, and leadership. The third group is that of the Vaishyas, or the agricultural and mercantile class. They comprise the hips of the social body and support society through establishing a firm economic foundation based upon agriculture and trade. The fourth group, the Shudras, comprise the legs or the feet of the social body, and this is the working and serving class, which includes artisans and craftsmen. The system itself is considered to be of a divine origin, and moreover, not artificially enforced upon human society, rather to be springing from natural categories and human nature. As such, Krishna says that the four social classes were created by me according to the divisions of the gunas and modes of work. Dharma is upheld through adhering to one's duties, and the Bhagavad Gita supports this principle by advising or requesting each and everyone to adhere to his or her duty. As such, it says, better to be deficient in following one's own dharmic duty than to perform another's duty well. Even death, while performing one's own duty, is better, for following another's duty invites danger. Apparently, this idea of the four varnas or classes is philosophical rather than empirical. But the last sentence, I mean that this is an ideal. It's not exactly that you find it always, people are mixed, but this is the ideal structure to be aspired after, the organizing structure. So now, having discussed dharma, we will discuss moksha. Moksha, what is moksha? The call for relinquishing the world of birth and death altogether. The ideal moral world, which is aimed at by dharma, is doomed to confront human reality, which is naturally less ideal. That's what I'm trying to say. As human existence, which is full of weaknesses and faults, is somewhat different than the ideal dharmic world, which is somewhat utopian. This gap occupies a major part of the Mahabharata, where on the one hand, a description of persons who were able to adhere to dharma despite various obstacles is given, and on the other hand, various human weaknesses which prevent one from adherence to duty are delineated. This more pessimistic view of the world leads to the understanding that human existence is ultimately doomed to suffering, and that the only real solution to this problem is the relinquishment of the world altogether. This call, characterizing the Upanishadic literature and the Vedantic tradition, calls upon the human being to undergo a process of self-correction or self-realization, and altogether relinquish the vicious cycle of birth and death called samsara. Accordingly, this world, which is temporary and transient, is never to be considered one's highest goal, as it is of lesser value than the principle or person from whom the world has emanated. As such, the Bhagavad Gita states, having come to me, these great souls do not again undergo rebirth into that transient abode of misery, as they have attained the highest perfection. All the worlds up to Brahma's world are subject to repeated birth, but having once reached me, there is no further rebirth. Mamopetya punarjanma dukalayam ashashvata nabnuvanti mahatmana samsiddhim paramam mama. Abrahma bhuvanaloka punaravarti narajuna mamopetya tukuntiya punarjanmana vidyate. That's the Sanskrit of these two verses. This well exemplifies the Upanishadic idea according to which one should relinquish this world in favor of a higher, imperishable, perfect, and eternal state, which is a state of liberation or moksha. Now, we have discussed dharma, and then we have discussed moksha. And apparently, these are two different things. On the one hand, dharma is humanistic, and it calls for proper ideal life in this world. And moksha considers this world in different terms, looking at this world as a place of misery, a place to relinquish. So there's a tension between dharma and moksha. So let's discuss this tension between dharma and moksha. Whereas dharma aspires for the moral upliftment of the world and the establishment of a proper and prosperous human society, the Upanishadic ideal is entirely different and even contradictory, as it calls for a total relinquishment of this world, along with a helpless transmigration from one body to another, which characterizes it. This is the tension. Moreover, the Upanishadic tradition calls one to transcend dharma, to go beyond morality, and the quest for social order in favor of a state of introspection and a constant thrust towards self-realization and liberation, from the cycle of birth and death. The Bhagavad Gita states that for one who is delighted in the self alone and is thus self-satisfied and self-content indeed, for him no dharmic duty exists. It seems that the Upanishadic tradition is not that concerned with morality and social order. Rather, it is mainly concerned with the relinquishment of this world and with self-realization. The idea that one who is established in the path of liberation is free from dharmic and moral obligations is rather extreme and no doubt exemplifies the deep gap between these two systems of thought. The Dharma and Upanishadic traditions are opposed to each other, yet in yet another cardinal question, and that is the question of action versus knowledge. The Dharma tradition carries a notable performative flavor, which may have its origin traced back to the ancient Vedic Mimamsa school, whereas the Upanishadic tradition is different in that it emphasizes knowledge over action. Dharma aspires to organize the world through action. The Brahmin teaches and sacrifices. The Kshatriya rules and protects. The Vaishya farms and trades, and the Shudra works manually. The Upanishadic tradition aspires to reach the understanding or knowing of the essence of all things, which is ultimately spiritual. Moreover, it encourages the renunciation of action and of worldly involvement in favor of the attainment of real knowledge and enlightenment. The question is raised by Arjuna, and he asks for a clear direction, which is the path to be followed: the path of action, adherence to duty, or the path of renunciation of duty in favor of enlightenment. He asks, O Janardana, if you consider enlightenment to be better than action, why then do you enjoin me to perform this terrible act? Your equivocal-like words confuse my mind. I beg you, make me certain of one thing by which I may attain the best. The Bhagavad Gita occupies a unique place in the history of Indian literature and thought in that it reconciles this deep tension and gap. On the one hand, the Bhagavad Gita adheres to dharma by enjoining the following of one's duty in accordance with the varna-ashrama system, thereby supporting the moral and social order. At the same time, it supports the Upanishadic ideal of renouncing the world altogether in favor of self-realization and the attainment of liberation, but propounds the unique and groundbreaking idea of an internal relinquishment rather than an external one. In other words, as opposed to an external relinquishment, where one leaves home and social responsibility in favor of becoming a wandering mendicant or a forest dweller, the Bhagavad Gita furthers an internal relinquishment by which one adheres to dharma but makes an internal progress along the path of renunciation by gradually learning to renounce the fruits of action and then devote them to the Supreme. This interesting reconciliation of the two otherwise contradictory ideals offers a system which intertwines social responsibility and action in the world with a deep sense of spirituality and relinquishment of worldly attachments. A famous verse propounding this internal renunciation says, "Your sole enlightenment is to perform dharmic activity, not ever to possess its fruits. Never shall the fruit of an action motivate your deed, and never cleave to inaction. Karmani eva dikaraste ma paleshu kadachana makarma phala heturbur mate sangastva karmani." Very famous. 247. So now, let's discuss the Bhagavad Gita's unifying structure, which I call the three-story house. The Bhagavad Gita is no doubt a unique literary creation, but at the same time, deciphering its meaning and philosophy is not easy or simple. Klaus Klostermaier refers to the challenge facing the reader in understanding the Bhagavad Gita. And now I'm quoting Klaus Klostermaier. Whoever reads it for the first time will be struck by its beauty and depth. Countless Hindus know it by heart, and quoted in many occasions as an expression of their faith and their insights. All over India and also in many places in the Western Hemisphere, Gita lectures attract large numbers of people. Many are convinced that the Bhagavad Gita is the key book for the respiritualization of humankind in our age. A careful study of the Gita, however, will very soon reveal the need for a key to this key book. Simple as the tale may seem, and popular as the work has become, it is by no means an easy book, and some of the greatest Indianists have grappled with the historical and philosophical problems it presents. End quote. These words, no doubt, touch upon one of the main challenges in understanding this treatise. Can it be tied together by a relatively simple and unifying theme or structure? I believe that this is possible. In order to understand the Bhagavad Gita structure and main theme, I offer the metaphor of a three-story house. This house not only has 3 floors, stories or tiers, but has a staircase or ladder, leading the residents from the first floor to the second, and from the second to the third. The lower floor represents human life in this world. The second floor is an intermediate floor, whereby one relinquishes worldly life and seeks a state of liberation, and the third floor represents full absorption in the liberated state. Stages of the staircase or the ladder are comprised of various states of action, categorized according to their underlying motivation. At the lower stage, one's acts are motivated by some utilitarian principle or gain. A stage still higher is when one seeks gain beyond this life in the heavenly world, and a higher stage is the stage of relinquishment of actions' fruits, thus acting for the sake of duty or dharma alone. A state still higher is the performance of one dharmic duty as the practice of yoga, considering the performance of duty to be the means by which the mind may be subdued. The high state is a state of performing one's dharmic duty while being liberated and entirely immersed in the Supreme. In this way, the Bhagavad Gita adheres to both ideals. It supports social responsibility, morality, and dharma. At the same time, it endorses the Upanishadic path of self-realization, which leads one from the depth of material existence all the way up to liberation. So, as I've discussed 3 stories, or levels, or tiers, let us discuss the first tier, the first level, which is the humanistic tier, and having the Vedic ritualistic sacrifices at its center. Vedic ritualistic sacrifices were common in ancient India. Some sacrifices were domestic, whereas others were public. Some were simple, whereas others were sophisticated and expensive. Underlying all the various sacrifices was a deep faith in the perfection of the Veda, and the conviction that sacrifice is the way for the attainment of prosperity, both in this life and the next. A major purpose or fruit to be achieved by the performance of Vedic sacrifice was the attainment of heaven. It is not entirely clear where exactly heaven is situated. It may be taken geographically as a particular higher planet, but also as a higher state of existence. It is apparent, however, that heavenly life was considered to be a more pleasurable existential state, and that normally one would aspire to achieve the state in the next life. Heaven's opposite was considered to exist too, and that is hell. Whether this refers to a geographical place apparently located in the bottom of the universe, or whether this refers to a lower state of existence, it is apparent that, according to the Vedic thought, hellish life is a state of suffering and should be avoided. Accordingly, the Vedas are considered eternal and perfect, and hence the somewhat problematic position of the Vedic sacrifices and rituals. On the one hand, some claim that the Vedas are of divine origin. It is one sacred that, as the Vedas are of a divine origin, it is one sacred duty to perform Vedic sacrifice and attain prosperity. both in this life and the next. Others who further the path of liberation agree that the Vedas are of a divine origin, but consider the ultimate goal to be the renunciation of worldly pleasures and prosperity in favor of liberation. As such, they consider worldly prosperity as a blessing which should be accepted moderately, but certainly not as the ultimate goal. Accordingly, worldly prosperity should be considered as a healthy condition of a society which is gradually progressing towards liberation. Considering the above said, it seems that the Vedic worldview represents what we call the first story. It is optimistic, as it aspires for a healthy, moral, proper, and prosperous human life, in that it aspires to avoid that which is immoral and unjust, and further that which is healthy and righteous. It is humanistic in that it perceives reality in complete and unbroken terms, centered around the human being. As such, its worldview is constructed by terms such as the human being, family, society, and above all, dharma, which constantly thrives to uplift human society. Having discussed the humanistic level, let us now discuss the higher level, second tier, which I call the spiritualistic level. So now we'll discuss the embodied soul, the problem of transmigration, and the yogic view of the second tier. The main problem characterizing this world and even the next or the heavenly world is the constant repetition of birth and death, the constant change, the inherent instability, the engagement of an otherwise free spiritual soul in a body destined to die, the constant struggle with the senses and their unsatiated desires. All these make the worldly and embodied state undesirable. Moreover, seen from the Bhagavad Gita's second tier's point of view, and even the state of heavenly life, which can be attained through the performance of Vedic sacrifices, is flawed by this vicious cycle of birth and death. In other words, having spent prolonged periods of time in the enjoyable heavenly state, one falls down again into the lower worlds and into lower states of existence. This vision naturally leads to an attempt to get free from this embodied state by taking to the process of self-realization, which includes a different set of categories. Progressing along the path of self-realization, one begins to think of oneself or herself in different terms. Instead of considering oneself to be a human being, one starts thinking of oneself as an eternal spiritual soul, rather different to the gross and subtle coverings, eye, body, and mind, which cover and encase him. As such, it is said, as childhood, youth, and old age before the soul within this body, so it comes to acquire another body. The wise is not swayed by illusion in this matter. Dehi nosmin yata dehe kumaram yovanam jara tata dehantara praptir tirastatra na muyati. This point of view is what we may call the second story one. From this point of view, one sees his own body and mind as external to himself, considers his deep entanglement with matter to be circumstantial, non-essential, and an obstacle on the path of liberation. And in this state, he tries not only to severe his deep relations within matter and mind, but to gain hold of the spiritual reality of Brahman, neither its personal or impersonal form. This worldview or the vision of the soul, the second story worldview, does not really aim at constructing a prosperous and moral human society. Rather, it furthers the relinquishment of this world altogether. It is not really humanistic, as the term human being does not play a very significant role in it. Rather, the term spiritual soul seems to construct the individual identities in this view, and as such it may be considered spiritualistic, a spiritualistic view. As such, a fundamental individual element is the spiritual soul, covered by various bodies which are not necessarily human. These may be bodies of plants, trees, reptiles, fish, animals, humans, or gods. etc. This worldview, which is based upon the vision of spiritual souls engaged in gross and subtle bodies, has an ethical implication too, as it envisions souls encaged in bodies. It naturally furthers the release of those embodied souls. As such, it furthers a different set of values than those of the first story. Instead of furthering human prosperity, it propounds equanimity towards both the good and the bad, towards both happiness and distress, towards both prosperity and poverty, and towards both the moral and the immoral. This equanimity serves as a foundation based upon which one can look beyond this world and search after the spiritual reality, which is utterly different and is designated as eternal, conscious, and blissful. As such, there are two components of the second story. On the one hand, the attempt to release oneself from the embodied state, and on the other hand, the attempt to establish or yoke oneself within the supreme, absolute, and spiritual reality. As these two principles, i.e., attempting to detach oneself from this world and attempting to yoke oneself to a higher state of reality, underlie the various yoga systems, this view may also be considered the yogic view. So let's see. Now, perhaps we should stop here and conclude that we have entered the Bhagavad Gita. We have offered an introduction, not complete. We'll continue the introduction in the next lecture. But we certainly have made a step inside the text. So thank you very much. Namaste.